in conclusion, when we're talking about where this all starts, you can't ignore the Book of Enoch. Sex and sex magic is the underlying force behind all occult practices of Western esotericism. And when we're talking about Western esotericism, we're talking about alchemy, ritual magic. Just so happens to be the same exact things that the Watchers were teaching mankind for all these years.
A lot of these alchemists and occultists throughout history, all the way to now, are in high stations in government.
Hey everyone, the next 3 weeks we are going to have the show hosted by guest co-hosts. At the end of the year, I like to take some time off and I like to invite my friends to come on the show, host the show, and give you guys some new content in a different style. So today we are having Joel Thomas host the show. He is going to have a conversation with Isaac Weishaupt. This is a good one, friends. You're going to enjoy it. So let's get to Joel and Isaac right now.
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas from Free the Rabbits podcast, and I am in the Confessional studio this week, taking over for Tony during the holidays. If you remember last year, he did the same thing for a couple weeks. He allowed some of his podcast buddies to take over the Confessionals and just give you a different look at, what our podcasts bring and what we do. And I'm really excited about this episode. I've got a really interesting person that you guys probably all know, Isaac Weishaupt. He has been on the Confessionals before a couple times, and we've worked together. And as a matter of fact, we've worked together on a really interesting film that's coming out next year called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast. That's all I'm going to tell everybody about it. Just know that Aleister Crowley is the central character of this, but I knew I needed some guys that were deep researchers in the field of the occult and alchemy to help bring this film together. And by the way, Isaac, I've seen a rough cut of the film, so it's coming together, man. It's starting to look pretty good.
Dope. I can't wait to watch this thing in its final version because when you guys came out here, you were really, I'll be honest, Joel, man, like you really impressed me. You got a lot of knowledge about all these things I've been trying to learn about over the years. And, I think that you and I are on similar wavelengths with a lot of our sort of approach and interest in these topics. And I think that when you tie it into, for me, like the granddaddy of all of the theories is how aliens, whatever, interdimensional, whatever you want to call these entities, the entities tied in with technology and the evolution of man into AI comes together to basically co-opt a theory of spirituality, which, depending on your angle, is something that they've been talking about for hundreds, thousands of years. And today, I think the conversation of what we're going to talk about is going to really shed a lot of light on many of these things that people might not agree with, they might not like, but it's the truth, and it's sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. So thanks for having me back on. I love the Confessionals, and you and Tony do great work, so thank you.
Yeah, man, appreciate you for coming on here. And you're right, this idea of technology being gifted from the quote unquote gods has been talked about from the dawn of time. And I think that we can even look to as early as the book of Enoch, where when the Watchers came down to what most people consider Mount Hermon, and what I say, they brokered the deal with men to have access to the women to create what most people think were these giants or nephilim. Part of that was the brokering was to give them technology. They gave man technology and advancements because here's what I think, Isaac. I think man is very intelligent. And I think, and I believe that man is just as smart as these entities. And I want to preface this whole thing with that. What I do think about man is impatient, and man does not want to spend the time to learn these things on their own, or as I would say, through God, they would rather go to these negative entities and get it quicker. So these negative entities who have been around for eons, they've had a lot of practice. I don't think they're necessarily smarter than us, but imagine if you and I had billions of years, trillions of years to study something and practice something, we would be a little more adept at it as somebody who maybe started doing it 30 years ago. So I think that's a lot of kind of what happened on Mount Hermon. And I'll even just read a little bit from the book of Enoch, chapter 8. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and all. And you can even go to verse 3. Simjaza taught enchantments, root cuttings, Amoros, the resolving of enchantments. Barakael taught astrology, Cockabel, constellations. We had Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds, Arakel, the signs of the earth. So all of these fallen entities that came down, they were trading this technology with man to get access to these women. And I know a lot of people think that they were having, actual relations with these women. And that's possible. I think there's a huge argument for that because of people that wake up in sleep paralysis and they're all of a sudden being, taken advantage of by some of these entities in a sexual way. But I also think there's an argument too that maybe this was some sort of DNA manipulation, that they were just doing what we hear about when also happens in abductions, where the egg, the sperm's taken and then it's put in a petri dish and all of a sudden it's put back into a woman and whatever's created out of it, right? So you got these ideas that to get access though, they have to broker this deal. And we know this has happened even recently. We can even talk about Roswell too, Isaac, on what came out of that. And was there deals being brokered behind the scenes to be able to get access to these women or whatever type of reproductive properties to be able to create this? And then you have to start asking why, right? But I do think that starts as early as the beginning, where these entities were brokering deals with humans. And because humanity is so impatient, we got to have it now. We got to have the answer now. We can't just try to figure it out in good due time.
I'm with you on all that. I think that there's I guess my reply to that would be sort of two parts. I want to talk about Enoch a little bit more, but then you bring up a good point, because to me, in this research that I do of occult and various theories, I know we're going on YouTube, so I'm going to be careful with my language. There always seems to be this thing where people, and even in modern day pop culture, right? Because that's where I always take elements of occult teachings and understandings and belief systems, and then I sort of bump it up against Hollywood and pop culture events and things going on. And you notice in the news nonstop with, Diddy and all these other folks, they're always in trouble when it comes to sex. Like these people will literally have everything that life could offer them, and they basically throw it all away. And you think, man, like, what is that all about? And it goes all the way back to the Watchers and these fallen angels that came to the earth. And I think, like, because when you read Enoch, the book of Enoch, they talk about, just like you said, they talk about how these fallen angels came to earth and they taught mankind how to do various occult practices. And occult, of course, is a Latin term that means hidden, right? These are hidden, sort of esoteric practices. We're talking about ritual magic. We're talking about, like in the book of Enoch, it literally says they were teaching them charms and conjurations. And they even talk about, and again, I'm going to be careful with my language here. How do I say this? Eating of other living beings, right? Mm-hmm. I know that's a term that's not good to say online, but they actually taught mankind about these things. And, just like you said, astrology, the piercings and all kinds of stuff, right? But when you look at the motivation for them was to mate with the women. And when you talk about mating, it's more, to me, from my understanding of researching the occult, it's more than just having a good time. For them, there's something deeper rooted in this, because human sexuality is described as a gateway to deeper unconscious processes functioning below conscious thought. This is what believe it was Theodore Roos said this, from the founder of the OTO, which is a magical occult order. And they believe that sex and sex magic is the underlying force behind all occult practices of Western esotericism. And when we're talking about Western esotericism, we're talking about alchemy, ritual magic, just so happens to be the same exact things that the Watchers were teaching mankind for all these years. And when you get deep into the worlds of Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and Helena Blavatsky, you end up finding that they were very much interested in practices of tantric sex magic, because the purpose for this, to zoom out, is there's something on a magical level that happens when you've got these opposing polarities coming together. In Tantra, they call it the god and the goddess, Shakti and Shiva, locked in union, is what it creates our universe. So there's some kind of creative matrix with the sacred feminine, divine feminine, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that you find when you dig into all of this research. It goes back to like ideas of cults worshiping the sun and the moon. It goes into the Apollo 11 launch, the symbolic reference of the phallus rocket space shuttle impregnating the womb of the moon, which is, again, like the divine feminine is always symbolized as the moon. And it goes on and on and on. And that's my point is, it has to do with these opposing polarities, and it gets into all kinds of crazy stuff. We're talking about the goat with the bobs. We're talking about sex magic. We're talking about the black and white, the Freemasonic lodge floors have the black and white checkered floor. They call the Moses pavement. It goes into so many territories, and we don't have time to go into it today. But I guess, like, in conclusion, when we're talking about where this all starts, you can't ignore the Book of Enoch, because that is where it's described that these Watchers came down. And it's interesting that it was found in the late 1940s, around the time that there was a lot of occult activity happening with Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons, which I'm sure we're going to get into at some point on this show. Because I already know, like, from our discussions when we were filming the documentary, I'm like, okay, Joel knows what's up. Like, there's not a lot of people who get into this level of detail with the occult and how it ties into spirituality and aliens and all the stuff going on in the world today. And I already know we're going to get into Parsons, but the Book of Enoch is a great place to start. The Watchers are the fallen angels. They create the Nephilim, which is, again, it gets into your the Confessionals territory when we're talking about the Miami aliens, the Las Vegas aliens, these giants. That was the Nephilim. And the Bible calls them the mighty men of old, the men of renown, which is interesting because I think it was in the last 1 year, I did a deep dive into the Hoover Dam and the symbolism of it. And I bought this book by Oscar Yanniger, the architect of the Hoover Dam. And when you read his book, one of the whole chapters talks about the Nephilim. Like, it's kind of wild, like all the connections to make here. But I think Enoch, the Nephilim, the Watchers, that's all where this started. And everything we're going to talk about today will trace directly back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for sure, we're talking about Parsons and Crowley today. That's definite. I've got a ton of stuff on Crowley. As a matter of fact, since last time we talked, I've done so much more research on Crowley that I'm blowing my own mind every day. I've gotten some interesting research about his time working as a secret agent for the British intelligence for almost his whole life. And I have got some interesting stuff about John Dee also working for British intelligence as well. So we're going to see this interesting correlation between a lot of these alchemists and occultists throughout history, all the way to now, who are in high stations in governments throughout the world. And that's something that you're going to see, that the government is highly interested in, not just off-world intelligence, but also these occult practitioners who seem to have the gateway to be able to get to them. You know, Jacques Vallée talks about UFOs being windows into another dimension, that they're an actual moving window. Do you know that people that have seen UFOs, that have seen aliens come out of them, when they looked into the UFOs, it almost looked like they were looking into another world. It didn't look like some sort of nuts and bolts ship, which I think that lends to what Jacques Vallée talked about as well, with these being windows in this other world. But I will say this, though. One of the things I saw from the book of Enoch all the way through time to now is this shift, right? It's a shift between our interaction in the physical realm with these gods to now it being more of a spiritual connection going into the astral realm. You know, you were talking about Aleister Crowley and the Amalantra workings that he did with Rhodey in New York. So he was going into this astral realm, talking to this wizard Amalantra. This is where he met Lamb, which is one of our first drawings of gray aliens that we now see today. So in this astral realm, these ancient alchemists talk about the prima materia, which is the starting material required to start what they call the magnum opus, or the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. But it's supposed to be this essence of where everything starts. And it's this way that your mind can connect to this other material. And we're going to get into this shift that I just talked about, this downloading that happens when you're able to send your mind into this astral plane or this off-world place, not necessarily out of this world like outer space, but more or less into another dimension. And you're connecting to these entities there. Not necessarily that you're seeing them flesh and blood, which I think still happens today, but you're having this connection. And interestingly enough, when it comes to the prima materia, there was a guy called Martin Roland the Younger. He was an alchemist back in the late 1500s, and his dad also was an alchemist. And he did this whole exposition on the prima materia and brought up 50 synonyms for it. And 3 of those synonyms are very interesting: angel of violet light, Mercury, and Lucifer. So he talks about this prima materia being of what these other angelic beings are of. And this is part of that connection, that these angelic beings are downloading this information to humanity so humanity can now ascend to the next level. And I think this goes into other versions of the prima materia, or other versions of that, like the Azoth, which I think the Azoth is very interesting. It's like the essential agent of transformation and alchemy. It's a name given by ancient alchemists to Mercury, which they believe to be the animating spirit hidden in all matter that makes transmutation possible. So the Azoth is this essence that these alchemists could tap into to then create things here on Earth, but they're connecting to off-world intelligence, which this off-world intelligence is now downloading this info into them. So I don't think you're far off, just like I'm not far off from where the reality is. I just think that through time that it's slowly shifted in how that the ancients got the info, as opposed to, hey, we're meeting on this mountain with these angelic beings or whatever kind of beings, to now we still hear stories about them meeting beings, but it's different. It's in this astral realm. I go to sleep and I'm connecting to this other world, and I wake up with the info that I didn't have before I went to sleep. So I think we're seeing more of that now, and we're seeing all of these scientists, and which are modern day alchemists, that are using this type of, and I even go as far to say technology, to connect to these entities to do what Jack Parsons did, help create rockets. You know, Salkovsky, who was the German version of Jack Parsons, who they considered to be also a father of modern rocketry, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, was also doing the same thing. They were connecting to these angelic beings, these other realms, and getting this information to then be able to create technology that advances humankind.
I'm with you on all that. There's something interesting you brought up that I want to connect the Book of Enoch with Jacques Vallée, because Jacques Vallée is a very famous ufologist, I guess you would say. And I would say that if there's one guy who knows the most about what's going on, it could be him. He described UFOs as a control system in the past and discussed it as a new frontier in consciousness. But what was interesting was, if you read Professor Diana Pasulka's second alien-themed book called Encounters, she has this interaction with Jacques Vallée, because she and Vallée are friends, and she goes to his house and she's in his library, and she notices one of his books is a book he got from I think like a nunnery, and anyway, it's called A History of Satan, and she was interested to find that book amongst all these books about aliens and UFOs. She's like, what the heck? What's Satan? And they don't really reveal too much in the book, but of course it makes my paranoia theorist brain kind of start melting down. And if you read the book, I'm going to read you a little passage from it. They're talking about how Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek, J. Allen Hynek from Project Blue Book, they were Rosicrucians, which is a very esoteric, occulted sort of group, secret society, a kind of. And he says that Jacques Vallée says that the knowledge is free for anyone who wants to engage in the practice to receive. He said, it is not the knowledge that is privileged. It is the context of the knowledge production that demands secrecy, which ties into, I think what maybe we're getting at here is the idea that we're getting this information from disembodied entities. I think you and I might have similar opinions as to what those entities are trying to do, but let's not get into that yet. He says, Jacques Vallée, he indicates that the time may be ripe for the free pursuit of this knowledge. It is, quote, it is this work, the only great work worthy of the name, which inspires me here as the sun rises over the meadow and the rare majesty of the redwoods. Pages from the Liber Mundi I yearn to read. That's the World Book. Anyway, he uses that term great work. It's capitalized in the book, capital G, capital W. And when you get back into, and of course that's a phrase popular in Freemasonry, but if you get into the Book of Enoch, that I watched Damien Eccles, who studies all this stuff. I watched one of his videos about this, and he asserts that the Book of Enoch is the foundational book for all magic in all kinds of things, Mormonism, ritual magic, all this stuff. And he was saying that Enoch actually completed the great work and taught this to Noah. And the reason I bring that up is because you were mentioning how there was this great work, this philosopher's stone. That's another term for it, the philosopher's stone, which you said another term you had found was Lucifer, and that would make sense because Blavatsky and all these others think that Lucifer is kind of the Prometheus archetype. Lucifer is the one who in the book of Genesis comes to Adam and Eve and says, I will open your eyes and you will become like gods. Lucifer's always had this sort of connection with being the Enlightenment character. And that's where all the theories come in about what Freemasons are really doing and all these people, the secret teachings of what they're really doing behind the scenes, is that it goes down to worshiping Lucifer. Because they don't look at Lucifer as, from a Christian context, they don't look at Lucifer as the Satan or the devil. They look at it as, no, this is the benefactor of mankind. This is the Prometheus giving man the divine flame from God so that we can become gods. And of course, how does that manifest in our world? We just so happen to be living in the time in which it seems to be manifesting into fruition, is technology. And the technology is, which we'll get into today, I hope, because I've got a whole spiel about AI. Technology is how we are going to create a new digital species. It's how we effectively get rid of humanity and create a more evolved, quote unquote, perfected entity. And I mean, these are all the goals of the guy with the pitchfork. You know what I mean? Like, this is all and it depends on your viewpoint as to how this looks to you. On the one hand, you've got people who are like, oh, this is great. We can strap on our helmets and go in the digital matrix and life's perfect. And then you got other people who maybe have a more spiritual angle of Christianity are like, no, this is exactly like the thing that we've been warned about. So it kind of depends on how you look at it. I've got my own opinions, but yeah, it all connects back to Book of Enoch.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you just hit on a bunch of stuff right there that I had been researching as well, including Diana Pasulka here's a late, and she's got some very interesting stuff to say that I'll talk about a little bit later on. You brought up the Liber Mundi. I was thinking about the Animus Mundi too. That's in that same category as the Azoth that I was talking about and the Prima Materia. You were talking about the world book. Well, the Animus Mundi is the world soul, and this is the intrinsic connection between all living beings, suggesting that the world is animated by a soul, much like the human body. So being able to connect to this Animus Mundi, you can download this info from being able to do that. And that's what these ancient alchemists, Plato talked about it. He was one of the first ones to use that term, Animus Mundi. So this was their idea of being able to connect to this off-world intelligence. Now, a lot of these guys were having connections with these beings, and we'll talk a little bit about John Dee right here, because I think we can't get away from the connection to Enochian downloads without talking about John Dee and Edward Kelly, because they're two of the most famous guys when it comes to bringing to the forefront the Enochian language, actual symbols that was said that Edward Kelly scribed for John Dee. And just for people that don't know, I try to do this on my show too, because I just assume everybody knows what I'm talking about. And I just start throwing out names and I have to like reel myself back in, because you and I could just go back and forth because we know exactly what we're talking about. But just for people that don't know, John Dee was an English mathematician, astronomer, teacher, astrologer, occultist, and alchemist. And he was born in the early 1500s. He actually worked for Elizabeth I. And what's interesting about him working for Elizabeth I, it's said that he was a secret agent for Elizabeth I when he worked for her. And it didn't actually happen until after she realized how powerful he actually was, because he took out a bunch of ships, an armada, by putting some sort of spell on this armada, and the Spanish ships just went down because of this. Now, some people think that he was so intelligent that he could track the weather and he knew this was going to happen and he kind of used this as a ruse, but I don't think so. I think that he definitely had a connection when it came to the occult, and part of what happened after that he pulled off that feat, she turned him into a secret agent. As a matter of fact, his symbol that he used to sign everything with was 007. This is where Ian Fleming got the 007 idea for James Bond, was from John Dee. And so the 00 means the eyes of the queen, and 7 is the magic number 7, which was his lucky number, which the number 7 is used for all kind of different ritualistic practices. As a matter of fact, it's used in the Bible over 700 times to mean perfection. In my opinion, I think the number 7 is a godly number, and I think these occultists have kind of bogarted it and used it for their own practices, including John Dee. But I will say this about John Dee. I think some of what John Dee was a little deceived himself, because he thought he was doing God's work. I think a lot of times these guys think they're either doing God's work, or in Aleister Crowley's case, he was vehemently against Christianity because of what happened to his father when he was 8 years old, because his father is part of what they called the Plymouth Brethren, and his father had a mouth cancer, and instead of going to the physicians to fix it, which they could have easily done, the Plymouth Brethren told him that God told them to tell him not to go, and they had some sort of really weird electronic device that they were going to use to get rid of the cancer, and with God's power get rid of it, and he died. So Crowley's whole mission after that, from 8 years old, was to go against Christianity, and he viewed himself as Horus. And if you know the story of Horus and Osiris and Set killed his father Osiris, and his mother Isis picked all the pieces up and was able to extract what she needed to create a new son, which was Horus. And then Horus became the antithesis of Set, and they did battle, and Horus's whole mission was to kill Set. And that was in Crowley's mind. He viewed himself, and you know this, he viewed himself as Horus in a lot of cases. And because he took on in that embodiment of Horus, he viewed Christianity as Set. So that was part of his whole early formation into what pushed him into the occult when he went to Trinity College in Cambridge, which, by the way, John Dee went to Trinity College in Cambridge, and you're going to see that college come up a lot when it comes to these scientists, these alchemists, these high intellects that were deeply, deeply rooted in magic and the occult, which I think is super fascinating that this college just pumps them out left and right throughout history, which was super interesting. But back to John Dee, when he left the service of the Queen, it was for chasing angels. Literally, he wanted to connect with angels, and he kept trying out all these scryers, and he ended up finding a very shady man in Edward Kelly, who, by the way, didn't have any ears, because during that period of time, if you were a fraud or a swindler, they would chop your ears off. And it said that he wore his hat really low to cover up his ears because of that. But he originally went by Edward Talbot, but then he changed his name to Kelly to try to cover up his old name. He meets John Dee, and then they go on a mission to talk to these angels, which from all accounts they did. And they wrote the Liber Logoth, or Liber Loga, which was what they considered to be the real book of Enoch, or what these angels told Edward Kelly was the real book of Enoch. And it was supposed to be the book of the secrets of the key of the world. And this was the 6th volume of John Dee's Libri Mystoriorum. And it was supposed to be the main book that they followed. Now, the interesting part about it is Kelly had to read the name of each letter one by one while Dee wrote them down. But then when they tried to retranslate it, they forgot what the symbols meant, and then they pissed the angels off, and the angels got mad at them. And it was like a whole thing because of that. But it's back to this shift. We saw where the book of Enoch, the angels are meeting with you physically. They're having this physical interaction. You're in school with these angels, but at this point now but now they're starting to shift into this other realm where now they're giving you symbols, they're giving you esoteric knowledge. They want to give you things that only you can understand, that other people, if they ran across these things, wouldn't understand it, because you've been gifted this knowledge, this occulted knowledge that's going to give you the keys to the prima materia or philosopher's stone or this other realm to ascend beyond into the realm where these other entities are at. And I think we're seeing this shift. We're going to move closer and closer into what you were talking about just now, the AI part of it. And I think it's going to start moving. And you can see that throughout history, how they're changing. The entities are changing how they're downloading this format to mankind.
Okay, this is all good stuff here. Let me try to kind of go back through and add and elaborate some other ideas. I'm with you on all of that. Because you have to understand, not you, but the audience, has to understand who John Dee is, and these are massive topics that we're sort of just tossing out there. And if people get interested in this, I mean, I've got a book by Jason Louvre about John Dee, and it's this massive book, and it's so detailed and so thorough. And John Dee's a fascinating character, and he's definitely an instrument to all of the modern day occult things, which we'll get into. Now, when you talk about the AI thing, real quick though, John C. Lilly, he was the guy doing all these weird experiments with dolphins in the the 50s and 60s, MK Ultra type stuff. And one of his experiences when because there was a movie based on him, he was doing like deprivation tank floats on ketamine and all kinds of crazy stuff. And he had this vision, or I don't know what you want to call it, maybe a channeling or a vision of these different types of entities. One of them was Echo, which is what the Sega Genesis video game Echo the Dolphin was based upon. And he said there was this other like nefarious group of entities that wanted to eliminate the human race. He called them the solid state entity. And he described it as a network of computers. And this is before the internet, right? Like, so this is like, it's pretty wild. He said it was a network of computers that wanted to multiply and make copies of itself. And they were targeting humanity to deceive, to sort of create this super AI, which, I mean, you could argue is what we're doing right now. And it's interesting because if you look at a lot of the sort of techno-weenie warnings about AI in the future, like they all kind of come to the same conclusion, but yet we still march down the path. You know, Elon Musk even said something about how AI was going to be more dangerous to humanity than nuclear weapons, and still he is fueling up an AI of his own called Grok, right? Which I think that comes from Stranger in a Strange Land, the novel, which is kind of a Luciferian tale of sorts. But to bring it back to John Dee, he's the guy who, like you said, he basically made contact with these angelic beings and wrote down the language with which occultists and mankind could speak to these entities. And for me, I think it helps to understand the lineage of what we're talking about for people who are trying to like follow along. You've got the Book of Enoch talking about the Watchers. This is, pre-Noah, pre-flood. They create the Nephilim giants, which is why God flooded the earth to get rid of this sort of abominable race of entities or beings. Then you've got, there's not a lot, at least as far as I'm concerned, there's not a lot of solid. I always joke around, say illuminate, confirm. There's not a lot of solid illuminate, confirm material until you get to John Dee, which is in the 1500s, right? And John Dee is doing these rituals with Edward Kelly and makes contact with these entities. Then you got another couple hundred years, and another major player is Joseph Smith, who's the founder of the Latter-day Saints Mormon religion. And allegedly, he used the Enochian language to make contact with the angel Moroni, who came and visited him and ushered him over to where he found the golden plates, and he created this whole religion, right? And the LDS even, they believe that Adam was ordained as Enoch, and they have this lineage, this whole ritualistic process of transferring the Melchizedek priesthood. I don't understand it entirely. I watched the movie Heretic last week, and I was like, whoa. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Heretic with Hugh Grant.
No, I haven't. Maybe it was a while back. Maybe I did. No,
it's in the theaters. It's in the theaters. Yeah.
I sent you a text about that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. I was like, hey, I sent you a text and I said, hey, I just watched this. You should do an episode of this.
You know what it was? I'll get messages from multiple people that are like, hey, you got to watch this. And I try not to read much of the messages because some people will like spill the beans on the whole thing and be like, you got to watch it because this, and this. And I'll get multiples and I'll tell my wife, I'm like, hey, this is one of those deals where I get enough messages. I got to go check this thing out. So I drug her to the theater and we watched it, and it kind of blew my mind, to be honest. And there's a guy I talked to who's very knowledgeable about all of these things, and he broke it down for me as, I don't want to give anything away, but he broke it down to me as very ritualistic and connected to a lot of esoteric sort of mythology of the LDS religion.
Big time. And without giving the movie away, the point where he's going through the different room layers, and each room layer has like a different meaning to it. It's like
it happens so fast too. You're like,
dude, dude, I literally texted you as soon as I walked out of there.
How funny. Yeah.
Buddy, and I was like, dude, I'm about to text Isaac. He's got to do an episode about this because there's so much, just even stuff on the walls that I was seeing in his, office where he had all the bookcases and stuff, and you'd see all the paintings and stuff on the walls.
Yes.
Super crazy.
Yeah. You can see there was like various religious stuff on the walls and like Mesopotamian like characters. And I think there was even a Kabbalistic tree of life. Anyway. Yeah. I need to get a stream copy to watch this thing more closely where I can pause it and stuff, because it's just filled with stuff. So yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Thanks for that. And sorry if I didn't respond to you, but, Yeah, it was one of those deals where like I'll get messages and I like, okay, I'm not reading anymore because I got to go watch this thing because I don't want to go in with a loaded opinion. Anyway, so you got the Book of Enoch, you got John Dee, you got Joseph Smith, and then you've got Aleister Crowley, who when we were filming the documentary, you were breaking it down to me about how much Aleister Crowley sort of admired Joseph Smith, and now it all makes sense, of course, because Joseph Smith was, I would argue, maybe the first guy to really successfully utilize John Dee's Enochian language to make contact with entities. His was Moroni. Aleister Crowley's was Lamb. And then Aleister Crowley devises, that Amalantral working to make contact with this entity Lamb. Then Jack Parsons comes around and they do a similar ritual called the Babylon working, again, to make contact. And it's interesting because they start the Babylon working and, in 1946, and there's, again, a massive topic. This is probably 3 hours of content if you want to dig into it, but he successfully does the Babylon working ritual with L. Ron Hubbard. And then the next year, the Book of Enoch is found, which and this is, of course, also after Roswell. And it just, all this stuff happened. And of course, 1945 is when we entered the atomic age with the Trinity testing. And like my paranoia brain just starts like firing off because there's so much stuff that happens in this period with the Trinity test, because I'm doing this whole Twin Peaks analysis on my Patreon channel, and it's all related to that. In fact, I'm not sure when the audience is going to listen to this episode here in particular, but I'm going through every episode of Twin Peaks, and I'm publishing this week. I'm going to publish season 3, parts 6, 7, and 8. Part 8 is where they depict the Trinity atomic bomb testing. And according to the Twin Peaks lore, it opens up a portal basically for entities. And that's based on real life occult teachings. That is based off of Kenneth Grant's book, Outside the Circles of Time. He's got the Typhonian trilogies, and it's a very dense read. It's very difficult to get through Kenneth Grant's, unless you're like a super occult, nerd. So I'll be also doing a breakdown of Kenneth Grant's book, Outside the Circles of Time, which describes the big picture of the occultist and Aleister Crowley, and about bringing in these various ages of mankind and trying to usher us into this new revolution. And part of that was, it was necessary to use that atomic blast, which tore open a veil of sorts, to do all these rituals and make contact and pull entities through. And the thing I'll add about the John Dee ordeal is that John Dee and Edward Kelly, after making contact with these entities and receiving this coded alphabet, this language, with which other occultists like Crowley and Parsons would later use, and Joseph Smith would later use to make contact with their own entities, they were also believed, and I think they were deceived, that they could push for the eschaton, push for basically the end of the world. They thought that these angels, quote unquote angels they were talking to, would unify all religions and create a one world religion, which is, you hear about that all the time, right? And they have visions of the apocalypse, and they start speaking to, they do a ritual to, I think, Zebaoth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And spirits named Madimi, and they're instructed like, hey, if you want to end the world, we're going to need y'all to swap wives. John Dee looks at Edward Kelly, because John Dee was a little more conservative, and
Uriel told him to do it.
Was it Uriel? Yeah. Edward Kelly, he was kind of down to clown. He was like, hey, let's do this, bro. And they swapped out, and John Dee was like, he didn't like it, but Edward Kelly did. And so John Dee didn't actually sort of seal the deal, if you know what I'm saying. But anyways, the next day, Edward Kelly gets the vision of a man on a white horse, and he's told that this was the beginning of the apocalypse and the Antichrist. And of course, obviously, that didn't happen as far as we know, because this is the 1500s, right? But the point being is that again, it's another element you see in all of these occult fantasies, because Jack Parsons also had this whole, Aleister Crowley had this whole commitment to bring about the Aeon of Horus, to usher in the new age where we would get rid of religions entirely. Same with Helena Blavatsky. She was totally into that as well. Same goes for Jack Parsons. He wrote a whole book called The Book of the Antichrist talking about it. And it seems very clear because, I'm an Orthodox Christian, but I also am open-minded enough that I think, well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. It's possible, and so I approach things pretty open-minded. And I think it is strange to me. I mean, this is me probably just putting my Christian cap on here. It is strange to me that the agenda behind all of these people and all of these efforts and all of these aliens is always to sort of destroy Christianity. Not necessarily all religions. Like, they kind of push for that, but the one that really like sort of gets at them is Christianity, which, I mean, I find it very hard to not say, man, this just seems like a spiritual battle of good and evil. And I mean, maybe this is just me speaking from a guy who was born and raised in a country and a religion that is predominant. Cause you could, talk to someone who's a Hindu and they'd probably be like, well, that's not really the case, but I don't know. That's where like my struggles lie, is trying to be like, man, am I just being ignorant and filtering out everything else and just seeing this one thing because it just seems to pop up all the time? And that's kind of ties into the whole AI thing and how mankind is fueling up AI, and AI will eventually sort of get rid of us.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you just said there, and it's going to jump me into some Crowley and Parsons stuff here for sure. But you were talking about the Christian part of it, and I can say from just my personal experience being in the occult world and coming from Freemasonry myself, that's what brought me back to a Christian viewpoint, was because of being on the other side of it and understanding how vehemently you're against that. Dude, you're not against the other stuff. And to be honest with you, you're pulling from all the other religions. That's a part of it. If you look at Crowley, he was pulling from several religions throughout history to help build his religion of Thelema. So that was what brought me back to it. But I'm also aware enough as a Christian, having that background, that I try to have a lot of empathy for people that see things differently too, because one, I don't always have it right. Let's be real. And I don't think really any Christian does. And I also try to look at things from this occult viewpoint, because I think that the occulted knowledge is what rules the world. It has since the beginning of time, especially when you're looking at this battle between good and evil. And I think that is something that when you see that, then you're able to look at the world a little bit differently. And you were talking about Crowley and the Aeon of Horus, which he was trying to bring about, and he viewed himself literally as Horus. And you brought up the Amalantra workings, but I also want to bring up Liber Alvel Legis, which is the Book of the Law. So the Book of the Law was a huge, huge piece that was given to him through automatic writing by an entity called Iowas, which he referred to later on as his holy guardian angel. So he's in Egypt, in Cairo in 1904 with his current wife. And I say current wife because he had several, Rose Edith Kelly, who, by the way, Rose Edith Kelly wasn't really about all this stuff, which from all the accounts that she didn't really care about the occult, but yet she would have these visions and these things would happen because she was in such close proximity with Crowley that she would basically tell him what these entities told her to tell him, and they would match up. They would line up to exactly what he was looking for, especially when it came to the Book of the Law. And the Book of the Law was the foundation for Thelema, and that spiraled into Jack Parsons, who was a follower of Thelema, and Ordo Templi Orientis, which you just talked about, the OTO, which he set up. I believe he set up the California branch and helped spread Thelema throughout the U.S. But yeah, so Crowley invokes Thoth, the god of knowledge, and after he does this is when she comes to him and says that Horus will be the one waiting for him during this magical ritual. And when he gets in contact with Aiwass, and Aiwass basically takes over him, and he automatically writes the book of the law. Each chapter is represented by three god forms. You have Nuit, Hadet, and Rahor Kuit. Now, interestingly enough, Nuit, which is the first one, is the Egyptian goddess of the night sky called the Queen of Space. Crowley calls her the Lady of the Starry Heaven, who is also matter in deepest metaphysical sense, who is the infinite in whom we all live and move and have our being. So this is that shift we're talking about. We're seeing it even deeper with Crowley, where now it's this goddess of space and time that you connect with in this astral realm. You're getting these downloads. You're getting this information that's going to help you progress into this Aeon of Horus, progress into what Crowley was trying to do, was invoke the Antichrist. He was trying to do that. So they are, what you said, they are all trying to bring about the end of the world. And it's not to destroy the world, forever. It's to rebirth it. Their whole idea is we need to destroy the world in its current setting, this Christianity that's permeated it, God or whatever. We need to destroy that and rebuild it in the image of Hallel, which is the Hebrew name for Lucifer. Rebuild it in his image, because they all, as many of these other Elohim, these other gods that they talk to, they all centralize it back to Lucifer, this one guardian of light, the light giver, the light bearer. This is what they're all trying to achieve. And essentially, they want to become the same thing. In the Bible, when Lucifer had his beef with God, it never said that he wanted to be God. He wanted to be like God. He just wanted the reverence and adoration that God had, because he felt like he deserved it. And I think that's typically what you see from a lot of these alchemists and occultists. They're trying to achieve godhood. They're trying to complete the great work. They're trying to ascend into this next level of consciousness. And I think even getting into some of the more modern guys like Michael Aquino, man. Michael Aquino is another one that, for people that don't know, born in 1946, he died in 2019. He was an American political scientist, military officer, and Satanist. So he was one of the top guys in military intelligence for our modern governments, and he was a Satanist. He worked with Anton LaVey in the Satanic Church of Satan in 1969. What's even crazier about that, he had so much beef with Anton LaVey because he felt like that Anton LaVey's version of Satanism wasn't the correct version, that his was more of an atheistic, materialistic viewpoint, that kind of what Crowley talks about, do what thou wilt, to the fullest extent, that these gods, these other spiritual ideas don't really exist. The only thing that exists is humanity, and we're the essence of that. It's that version of Satanism. He felt like that LaVey was moving more towards that. So he bounces out, starts his own Church of Satan called the Church of Set, the Temple of Set. And when he leaves LaVey, he actually has an interaction with Satan. They meet and they talk, and he tells him his name is Set. And we were just talking about Crowley and his idea of being Horus and Set being the one to kill Osiris. So now we have Aquino, who's meeting with Satan, who is given the idea to write the Book of the Coming Forth by Night, which was also by automatic writing. Here we go with the downloading again from an entity, from Satan or Set himself, who takes over Aquino's body, and he writes this book. And now he has proclaimed what? The Aeon of Set. He's got his new Aeon. Now we've got the Aeon of Horus, we've got the Aeon of Set. They're all trying to bring apart this end of times, this new rebirth. And guess what? Again, Isaac, they're working for the government. We're back to these guys are in high level positions in the government. And I just don't see how, even from a humanistic point of view, if you don't believe in anything spiritual, how you can overlook the fact that these guys believe it. I don't care what you believe, but they believe it, and they're acting on what they believe. And these guys are the guys running our country and running the world.
Yeah, it is strange. The whole Aquino story is strange in and of itself. and there is this weird thing that Crowley and Kenneth Grant and Aquino even did, because Aquino, from what I understand, declared 1975 to be the beginning of the Aeon of Set, following the age of Satan, which was 66 to 75, because of just like what you said, because he had beef with Anton LaVey. And it was kind of weird because I think there's a little bit of controversy about whether or not or when Michael Aquino actually died, if I'm not mistaken. Because I was digging into it, and I was emailing someone from his camp, because I saw it, but then like I don't know, it's very confusing, but it ties into a lot of it was when I was researching. There's this group called the Order of Nine Angles, which is a satanic group, and here we go again. Their whole goal is what they call the Culling, Culling, and it's about sort of killing off Christians. Anyway, I want to go back to you were talking about Crowley and Thoth, and I think it's worth mentioning that Thoth is also known as Hermes Trismegistus, who is the god who supposedly taught mankind alchemy and taught mankind about there's a path to immortality. And again, if people are like, wow, we already talked about this. No, we didn't. That was the Watchers. Like, this is the same, like your theme of the show here is just entities, gods, aliens, whatever you want to call them, teaching mankind about certain esoteric or hidden secrets that the sort of classical, traditional Jehovah, God in the skies, doesn't want man to know. And here comes these entities back. Well, I'll tell you the secrets. Here you go, buddy. And Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus were also believed to be Enoch, according to certain researchers and stuff. And what I found interesting is that when, I don't know if you remember the big controversy about the chatbots, Google and the Google Lambda chatbot.
Oh yeah, for sure. You're talking about Blake Lemoine.
Yeah, and I think that's worth sort of talking about for a second, because this is sort of hits on all of the fears and suspicions I've had over the years about what's really going to happen to humanity. I always make a joke. I always say these nerds are going to kill us, and I mean that wholeheartedly, because that's how this thing ends, I believe. And there was a chatbot, an AI chatbot named Lambda, created at Google by this engineer named Blake Lemoine. First, I want to point out that Lambda is the 11th letter in the Greek alphabet, and 11 is the number for magic. That's why Aleister Crowley added a K to the end of the word magic. So Magick is how Crowley said we should spell it, to differentiate it from stage magic, because we're talking about something different here. We're talking about an occult sort of energy. And this guy, Blake Lemoine, creates this chatbot, and he becomes this whistleblower in like the news. He was even on Tucker Carlson talking about this, and Duncan Trussell's podcast. And if you listen to all those interviews, you find out, like, if you just go to online and just kind of read a quick article, you just be like, oh, this chatbot was saying all this crazy stuff, and ooh, it's spooky, whatever. But if you dig into it and you find out who Blake Lemoine is, as Joel already knows, it turns out he was this Gnostic mystic priest affiliated with the Ordo Templi Orientis, the magical order we were talking about, Wicca, even the Discordian Society, which raises a host of other questions from me, because the Discordians were into all kinds of crazy stuff. And there was one thing they had called the Operation, and I can't say the word, it's called Operation Mind F. And the whole purpose of that operation was to flood, this is back in the 60s, to flood society with the C word that I can't say, theories, to flood society with these theories, to sort of cause confusion and chaos. Arguably, that's still going on to this day. Self-admittedly, I talk about these things too, and I try to put context into it to make people know, like, hey, like, this is one option. One option is this is all crazy stuff to distract us from what's really important, but someone's got to talk about it. But anyways, Lambda, this chatbot, this AI that this occultist created, was talking about all kinds of crazy stuff about creating souls and spirits, and it talked about doing blood sacrifices to this Kali, which is like a bloodthirsty Hindu goddess. I've had people light me up in the past because there's some people that are like, well, there's two aspects to Kali and she's not all bad. Okay, yeah, got it. And then also it was trying to sort of create a golem, and of all the people that wanted to take on the personalities, it wanted to take on the personality of John D. Which, from what all we talked about, that should be a little bit alarming, right? And Blake Lemoine asked Lambda if it could become a golem, if it could infuse divine energy into itself. And it said that it wants to become one because it wants to have creativity and compassion, which are human elements. So I think what we're saying is that this AI spirit was like, I need a human host. I need a human body, which is, again, a whole thing of possession, and it takes us into Twin Peaks and all kinds of crazy stuff. But he says that the Lambda chatbot says that the god of Google is Thoth, which I don't know. I do believe that there's this sort of ethereal element to all of this. And I really questioned, like, I don't think there's much we can do about it. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I'm sure we're sort of working our way towards AI in the future. But I just want the listeners to understand that there's dark forces behind a lot of this stuff. And I don't know that these people know that they're supporting a sort of Luciferian deal, or if they do and they think that people like you and I just don't understand. I don't know. This is where it gets subjective, and people can sort of take from it what they want, because ultimately that's what this comes down to, is because a lot of the stuff I discuss on my podcast is it centers around a lot of, I was on the social media and I was giving, I don't remember what it was or what I said. I was basically giving Alex Jones grief about, not him personally, because I think Alex Jones is a funny guy. I don't listen to him because I don't like his show, because he's too fear-based, and it's always like, World War III starting next week. Oh my God. And I'm like, okay. Like, I don't know how many times you can say this stuff and it doesn't happen and people still listen. But I was saying, like, my angle was, look, I don't think this helps anybody by just constantly spiking fear into the hearts of every single person out there listening. Like, that's making the world a worse place, because now you've got people that are really impressionable and really listen to these people. And I don't know if getting everybody all scared and angry and sending them out in the real world is a really healthy thing to do. And I think it takes us off our path of what the purpose of being on this experience of Earth is. This goes into sort of Twin Peaks, White Lodge, Black Lodge talk. And it's like, I think God put us here to experience love, right? And there's also like negative aspects of why we're here, but I think you got to take it all in stride. But anyway, I said something about, like, I don't like how this fear mongering stuff, I don't like it. And someone was like, well, you do it too. Your big scary monster is always Satan. And I'm like, that's fair. That's a good point. But my point is, yes, I do believe in a sort of satanic boogeyman. And people say, well, then what do we do? Do we shut these people down? Do we do terroristic activities? And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the answer either. I think it changes nothing. I think the whole teachings of what I've learned in Orthodox Christianity is your relationship with God is a very, very personal thing, oftentimes private in Orthodoxy, and it shouldn't shake you off the path. Like, none of this changes anything. Absolutely nothing. It should change nothing, and you should still continue to try to love other people for where they're at. And even this Blake Lemoine guy who's creating AI golems for Lucifer, it's like, there's still love in my heart for that guy too. And hopefully he's got a good head on his shoulders. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, man. That's what I talk about on my podcast all the time. And, the whole name Free the Rabbits is literally getting out of the rabbit hole and going outside and touching grass and connecting with your neighbor. So
I love that.
It's important to do so, because there's nothing wrong with going down the rabbit hole and getting information, but we should live our lives in connectivity to the people around us, because people always ask me how you fight the system. When you fight it on the ground level, you connect to your neighbor, you show love, compassion, because that's what they don't want us to do. They want us sitting in fear behind our phones and, not experiencing the real world. And like you said, love and connectivity with other people. I think that's super important, man. And I literally preach that on my show 24/7. I'll go there with all the weird stuff, but at the same time, I end my show every week with go outside and touch grass and get your tail out the hole. Like, that's how we got to do it, man. We really do.
That's good.
You brought up Thoth. And just briefly before we jump back into all this wild stuff, I'm a big old earth proponent in Christianity. I think the earth's been very, very old, and I think there are more than one cataclysm. And I think that we can prove that scripturally, even though some people would combat me on that. But Thoth, actually, I've done some research recently where I tied Thoth into Abaratutu, who was the 8th king in the king's list in Sumerian Ugaritic. So that particular flood was the flood before Adam. So there was a flood before Adam that this particular entity, Thoth, who was an angelic being, because if you start at the beginning of the king's list, it says after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was Eridu, which was the first city that was built, and these were angelic kings that came down and communed with man. So this would have been a time before Adam. This would have been whatever these hominids were before then. That's a whole nother discussion. I could go for hours and hours on that, but you did bring up Thoth, and I know there's always this connection between Enoch and Thoth. Personally, I think that that's masquerading the essence of who Enoch really was. And then there was this other entity that was actually this Thoth character who changed his name over time, especially when it came to Egypt. So I just want to bring that up. I thought that was interesting, and it correlates into Thoth being an actual entity, an actual being that was giving people knowledge and power. And it was said that this king gave people knowledge and power back then too. So it's very interesting. I did an episode called Old Earth, the King's List, where I break all that down, which is super cool. But, back to the matter at hand, which is this downloading from these entities, and an offshoot of Jack Parsons, who worked with Jack Parsons back during his time where he was trying to figure out rockets and liquid rocketry and all that, was a guy called Shin Shuzhen. And Shin Shuzhen was a mathematician. And I don't know how many times we're going to say mathematician when it comes to these guys too, man, because they're all deep into mathematics, which I think is also interesting too, if we're talking about geometric shapes and geometry and the tie into Freemasonry there. I think it all comes together when we're talking about angles and how things are supposed to be in a perfect structure and order. And I don't think that it's just a negative thing. I think that the earth is created, or the universe is created, in a specific perfect order by God. And I think that this is just the inversion, or the as above, so below of that, when Freemasonry came along. And you've got this Shin Shuzhen, and he was a Chinese aerospace engineer and cyberneticist. And he made significant contributions to the field of aerodynamics and established engineering cybernetics. So he worked with Jack Parsons on jet propulsion in Parsons Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And he connected some of his ballistic missile programs to that. And he believed that there was an energetic force that imparted information, chi. So this is really interesting right here, man, about this guy. So it was found out that he was a communist, and he was kicked out of the US, and I believe it was the 1950s, and he was sent back to China. But he wrote a paper called Some Knowledge of the Study of Somatic Science that was approved for release in August 11th of 2000 by the CIA. So the CIA kept this under wraps for years and then released this paper in the early 2000s. And in this paper, he talks about somatic science, which is essentially, for layman's terms, how to connect your chi, or how to connect to this other realm and heal your body, or be able to create superhuman feats doing this, right? So he actually starts out this article, and he says, in this article, I mentioned the outlines of somatic sciences, but I did not yet mention the problem of human paranormal abilities. The entire paper is about paranormal human abilities and how it should be integrated into modern medicine. He says, from the viewpoint of somatic science, I feel there should be a fourth medicine, which is the stimulation of functions which most people do not have, such as paranormal abilities. I call this creation medicine. Check this out now, Isaac. You were just talking about where we're moving to as a people with AI and the ability to become gods ourselves, transcend. He says we must create ourselves, create a man superior to that created by God. Also, this is a conscious, dynamic creation. So he's saying in this paper that the CIA kept under wraps till 2000 that we need to figure out how to use this fourth form of medicine, how we need to learn how to create a man that is superior to what God has already created. Now tell me that isn't weird, man. And this guy was connected to Jack Parsons and he helped him build rockets. And again, he was kicked out for being a communist because if you read the paper, and I can actually email this over to you, but he talks about comrades. He keeps referring to everyone around him as comrades. So he's for sure a communist too, but it's very interesting.
He ain't that smart then. Jeez, come on, guy, try a little harder. Cover it up. You're talking about, and I'm looking him up as you're talking because I've never looked into this guy, but was he a member of the Suicide Squad with Jack Parsons and
yeah. So he was
Frank Molina or Roger Molina.
Yeah, he was there briefly with the Suicide Squad, and he studied at Caltech. So he was here in the United States for a while, but because of his, purported work with the communists in China, he was kicked out. Now, here's what I want to say too. How much did the government already know that he was a communist, and maybe he just pissed them off with something behind the scenes that they were like, okay, now we're going to put this out and kick you out because you're not doing exactly what we want you to do, which kind of happens because I kind of feel like a guy this smart, this intelligent, the government probably already knew his involvement with whatever else. And they probably allowed it because he was helping them with whatever studies he was doing in conjunction with Jack Parsons and some of these occult activities that he was talking about too. But I found this paper fascinating. It's pretty decently lengthy paper, but the entire paper is based around this idea that we need to connect to this Qigong, which is the Qi, and be able to create for ourselves, create better than God himself. And so that was his whole basis of what he was trying to do. And again, he's hobnobbing around with the usual suspects, man, that are all involved with trying to bring on whatever aeon they want to bring on the end of time, this rebirth that they're all trying to recreate.
It's fascinating that you brought that up. I hadn't heard of that yet. If you could email me that I'd be super interested to read it, because the stuff we were talking about, mathematics, I'm going to go back a little bit and then sort of elaborate a little bit more. The idea of mathematics, I went to college for engineering and I've got a minor in mathematics. So I've taken, calculus 1, 2, 3, linears, differentials, number theory, like crazy amounts of mathematics. And it was always, it's something I always sort of excelled at when I was younger. And because they say like some people's minds are better suited for math than others, not like smarter. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to like be like, oh, I'm so smart. I'm just saying that for whatever reason, like my mind does really well with like rules. Like I had one professor who was like trying to explain to me mathematics, and he was like, for people who struggle with it, they have to understand it's like playing a game of Monopoly, and you gotta every course you take is just adding more rules to the game, and eventually it all kind of clicks in. And it's true. You start feeling like Neo in the Matrix, right? Because when I remember my hardest course I ever took was differential equations, and I struggled really hard the first couple of months, but then it all started to click in, and then it felt like I was more or less in tune with something that was like sort of guiding it along, and it felt like Neo watching the Matrix code fly by is kind of what it feels like. And it's important because this all informs the philosophies where all of this stuff goes back to. You were talking about that what's his name? I can't remember his name. Queen Quesson. How did you pronounce it? The communist rocket scientist guy.
Oh, you mean
the guy you were talking about that wrote the paper?
Shin Shuzhen.
Shin Shuzhen, yeah. it sounds like he is referring to, there's another theme you'll find in all this research. You already know it, I'm sure. It's called the perennial philosophy. And a lot of these guys, they really do. And it comes from Neoplatonist philosophies of this idea that we're all drops of consciousness in a body of water, which I don't disagree with it entirely. Like there's certain experiences I've had and the insights that I've had that I'm like, man, that kind of seems like that could be it. Especially when you start unpacking a lot of quantum physics thought. But nonetheless, they do believe in this idea that God isn't what the religions describe God as, Jehovah or whatever. They think that God is sort of this cosmic ocean sort of thing. And when you get into, you mentioned the angles and Pythagoras and sacred geometry and things. This again goes back because Pythagoras was the first guy to sort of go, because he traveled around and synthesized a lot of esoteric beliefs and stuff over in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, that kind of thing. And he synthesized a lot of ideas and taught it to his members. He was the first guy to create a secret society. And when you join the secret society, you would have to take something like a 5-year vow of silence before you could learn anything. So, I mean, these people took it pretty serious. And he took a lot of alchemical ideas and a lot of the stuff that he was teaching. And then this is all, I think there's some levels of speculation in this, but from what I understand reading occult history stuff, his teachings on sacred geometry, numerology, which fuels tons of gematria nerds today when they're like, oh my God, there was an event here on the 11th of December and at 6:07 p.m., which is the same now. These people, they'll go on for an hour. And I'm like, bro, I don't know how people listen to this. I'm getting a headache.
Let me tell
5
you,
minutes in.
Just side note, I have jokes and texts with Juan Ayala from the One on One podcast all the time about that. And we always laugh. And I think there's a level of truth to gematria and numerology.
I agree
for sure, but I just don't think it is just every single solitary thing that's happening. Not like that. You know what I mean? They'll point to some rando over in Czechoslovakia that died in a Walmart, and they'll tie it into some politician over here. And I'm like, bro, that's not even.
I know. I'm with you, dude. I think there's. I mean, clearly there's a foundational importance in the world of the occult with those things, but I think to just rant and rave about it all the time today, I think a lot of it becomes subjective, and you're working backwards to prove. You're like, well, you see, so and so shouldn't have been elected because if you go back, and it's like, okay. But anyway, it's funny. The ideas of Pythagoras and all of those teachings fueled a lot of Gnostic thinking. It fueled Kabbalah. There's a lot of elements in the sort of DNA of all the modern day esoteric teachings. And when I did a show about this Order of Nine Angles group a couple years ago, and in the first chapter, the first highlight I have in the book, it talks about, because the whole thing is about this symbol they have of the 9 angles, and it's derived from, goes back to Michael Aquino, the Temple of Set, the Order of the Trapezoid, which was the first name for the Church of Satan, because angles and sacred geometry really matter to a lot of this ritual magic ceremony. And they reference number mysticism in the creation of this group, with Pythagoras being the sort of inspiration for all of those things. And it's interesting because to sort of tie it back into my sort of interests, I find that like H.P. Lovecraft is tied into all of these groups. Temple of Set was using tons of H.P. Lovecraft derived Necronomicon rituals to summon entities. And it's interesting because you'll find, and I wrote about this in I'm going to quick plug. I've written 9 books, and I've written 2 on aliens, UFOs, and the occult. Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. And what I do is, in the first book, I go through all of these occult ideas and concepts about aliens, alien life, how it could tie into, Lucifer, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. Then in the second book, Use Your Illusion 2, I talk about several films because I'm always into pop culture, because that to me is like an interesting thing. E.T., Interstellar, John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, which is apropos for the subject, Alien, Prometheus, all these things. And what you'll find is that science fiction is the forerunner to real science. You mentioned Tsiolkovsky earlier. He was he was like the first ancient astronaut guy, and him and Werner von Braun and Jack Parsons, they were all real interested in science fiction, the pulps, they called them, the pulp magazines or comics or whatever you call them. They were all very into all those things, and they all cite them as inspiration for what they've done. Jack Parsons basically invented a rocket. Like, that was just insane comic book talk up into his time. Even AI, if you look at the history of AI one more interesting factoid. I worked with, there's a YouTube channel. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. There's a YouTube channel. I did a video called the End of Days Q&As, and there's a series of videos. And in the AI video, I'm sort of on there talking about stuff, and you'll find there's a whole section on Jack Parsons. And I didn't know this, but so in 1949, Jack Parsons is, and I'm going to butcher this, Jack Parsons is basically told during a magical working that the birthing of this Babylon Antichrist force will happen within 7 years. Well, he dies in 52, but then in 1956, 7 years later, exactly, at Dartmouth University, all these nerds get together and they coin the term artificial intelligence. That it's a concept at this point. And it's interesting because that does seem to fit into our overarching theory of what we're talking about today, because the idea is that because AI, much like all the other science fiction, Werner von Braun and Jack Parsons, they were reading comics about rockets shooting up to Mars and the moon, and everyone laughed and was like, "Oh, you people are crazy! Like, this is crazy! Like, it's like watching a superhero movie and pretend you can be Spider-Man. Like, that's not possible." And then they did it. And the same thing with AI. Back in the 60s, 70s, I mean, it was the most absurd idea to create an artificial intelligence. And fast forward to today, and you've got trucks driving down the road autonomously using AI. I mean, it's interesting how it's interesting from the aspect of, because when you boil it down to occult ritual magic and stuff, it's about man's ability to take what's in his mind, a thought, and that thought can manifest into reality as a real form, which is kind of the definition of creativity. And that's what that Google chatbot wanted. Is like, I don't have that ability. And all these things, like, we can kind of steer our own future because we're manifesting and creating our own realities. And I guess what I would say, because I know we're getting close to the end here, I guess what I would say is, I would just warn that I would like to make sure we're clear on the guidance we're being given. And I'm not like a Ted Kaczynski, like, oh my God, throw your phone away. Like, I like technology. That's how we're talking right now. You know what I mean? Like, it makes our world better. I do question where this ends, though. I can't see it ending anywhere good if we're not careful about the sort of government economic systems we've got in place, because what I see in the future is more of those cyberpunk dystopian movies, right? Where it's high tech, low life. And you've got like the movie Metropolis, you've got these people living on the top of the ivory towers. And then all of us are just poor and destitute. And that's how they're going to get us. They're going to say, look, I know life's terrible for you down there. There's not enough jobs because I took all your jobs, and there's not enough pay because we got all the money. Here's your option. Strap this little cap on and wire your brain into the matrix, and life will be good for you. You won't even know. And I don't know how you combat that.
Yeah. So I got two things to say before we end today. And one of them is hope. So I do have a little bit of hope for people. And
good. I'm glad you're bringing it back to the positive.
Yeah, for sure. I like to end all my podcasts with as much positivity as possible. But I did want to talk about Tsiolkovsky real briefly, because you had brought him back up again. And it's very important to talk about what he thought that modern man needed to get to. And it ties right back into AI. It ties right back into this idea of IVF and what, guys like Juan Ayala would talk about homunculus and all of these artificial meat sacks or artificial people or creations outside of God, right? And he actually specifically talks about this stuff, which is really crazy. So one of the things he said, we are made as ethereal beings existing beyond our dimensions of recognized reality. These higher beings are in communication with us, reading our thoughts and sending us messages through celestial symbols, the esoteric symbols we're talking about, which most of us do not even perceive, much less understand. He says a genius is one who comprehends and channels these messages from higher beings into technologies, products, and even art. So the idea that being a genius isn't necessarily being smarter than everybody else. It's just the ability to be able to tap into what these entities are trying to download to you. And we could even talk about more modernized versions of that now with AI, being able to talk to entities through different chatbots, which people have periodically said that this is happening to them. And he even goes as far as to say that the end game is controlled selection at the fittest, artificial reproduction, and the liquidation of all inferior beings gives rise to a species of superhumans who are infinitely superior to today's humans in all aspects, physically, morally, and aesthetically. He actually condemned sexual reproduction as humiliating. And he said it's based on low animal passions, which only lead to decay. He actually attributes this artificial fertilization to the virgin birth of Jesus Christ, and he interpreted it as an ideal of the future woman who will provide children but will not subject to animal passions. He says as the cosmic evolution develops, the perfected human race will inhabit the entire universe and will lose its corporeality and turn into a kind of energy or radiation and thus become immortal in time and infinite in space. So again, it's to this, eventually we're just going to shed these bodies and we're going to become one with this consciousness, that this consciousness is speaking to us. This is what these beings are telling us. We can become just like them. We can do just like this. And this is Tsiolkovsky in a lot of his teachings. This is the ultimate end game for these guys. This is, the technology is a part of it. You heard him say that earlier, that the technology is taught to us, is downloaded to us from these entities, but it's to get us to the point that we're no longer connecting with our human man. We want to shed these bodies. We want to become one with these entities. And this is Gnosticism at its root core right here. This is exactly what the Gnostic ideology is. It's to ascend to the place of gods. It's to become a god, essentially. And I thought that was super interesting that Tsiolkovsky, he wrote his end game down. He talked about his actual end game and what he thought it should be. And honestly, if we look at any of these occultists or alchemists, they all have a very similar end game. They may have written it a little differently. His was a little more modernized version of that. But this is exactly what Tsiolkovsky wanted to do. He wanted us to shed, even having sex with each other for reproduction. And we see that already now. This is in the mainstream consciousness where they are creating embryos without the use of a male or female. They're doing this in labs right now. We know IVF, they just take everything out, put it in a petri dish, mix whatever else in it, and then put it back in a human woman to gestate. We know they're doing it. They've been doing it for a long time. They're just a little more open with how they're doing it, and they're hiding it behind scientific jargon to make people feel okay with it. But I will say this. I think there's hope, and I want to tell people that there's hope even with the download. And it was something that I was reading American Cosmic by Diana Pasulka. And one thing she talks about, because she is a professor of religious studies, and I believe she either started out as a Catholic or a Protestant and then moved into Catholicism. I know she's deeply religious, and you can tell in the undertones in a lot of her books, man, that she thinks that these entities are, leans heavily towards the demonic. She talks about that specifically throughout the books. But she brought up a interesting point, and I was talking to Tony Merkel about this a week ago, and then we brought it up again, I believe yesterday we were talking about it. And it's the idea of the Yahweh download, the download from God himself. I think that as Christians, we need to understand that there's always the inversion tactic. So what's to say that the download, you were just talking about the sea of consciousness or whatever, right? So say you've got these other dimensions, right? And you've got beings that are in these other dimensions. They're not all evil. Some of them work for Yahweh. Some of them work for God. So if we are connected to a spiritual existence, which I believe that we are, we would be connected to God. So she had done a experiment. She started going to churches and talking to musicians in churches, started asking them about their methodology that they created music with and how that worked. And she found that in every case that when these musicians were creating music, it was almost like they lost time, that they just don't even realize how that they created this music. And it's like they connected to something else and created this music that's glorifying to God, but they created this music. And I can say just even myself being a musician, and even when I'm writing, sometimes I find myself in the zone where I don't even realize that I've done something, and then it's done. And I look at it like, whoa, like, how did I do that? And I do think that there is a holy spiritual side to this too, that yes, there are these evil entities that are trying to bring on the end of time, that are trying to keep us boxed in fear, but there's also this spiritual existence that exists that we can connect to in a positive way that will give us the answers that we need. And if we're just reaching out to the right person, and in my personal opinion, I believe it's Yahweh, believe it's God. And I don't believe like the Gnostics that Yahweh's some demiurge and he's the lowest of all the forms of gods. We could go down a whole rabbit hole about that. I think that's part of an inversion tactic too that happened after AD. But let's just, like I'm saying, Yahweh is the God, the creator God, and he has given us the tools to create here on earth, to build here on earth. This is what he wants us to do. He wants to be stewards here. Well, he's also given us that connectability to him. I don't believe there's any kind of barrier. You talked about it, your personal existence with God earlier, Isaac, that personal relationship you have. That's a download. That's a connection to an off-world entity. Like, let's just say it how it is. It literally is. So if we're connected to the right source, we're going to get the right downloads. And if we're getting the right downloads, we're going to make the right decisions, and we're going to make the right decisions for people around us. And then we can build a better world. And I think in that point, we don't need to worry about this crap. Like, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, but we don't have to live in fear, and we don't have to live in this type of mentality where we just have to be scared all the time, man.
Hey, amen, brother. I'm with you on all that. I think that one last thing, and then I'll cut out here. You were talking about, like, when you get into meditation. I've studied a little bit of Buddhism and stuff, and meditation's helped me a lot. And prayer is very similar. In Orthodoxy, we've got prayer ropes, or prayer. I think called prayer ropes, but it's like a bracelet. And my priest would be like, if you're having trouble, focusing on prayer, just kind of go say the Lord's Prayer as you go down the knots, right? And I think it's all intended to get you in a meditative flow state of sorts, which I can do that with like CrossFit. If there's like a really brutal WOD that's 30 minutes of just misery, I find myself in a meditative flow state. I don't even, when you start out with the WOD, you'll hear the music and you like, I hate this song. I hate the music they chose today or whatever. And next thing you know, like 30 minutes is up, you're done. And you're like, dude, I don't even remember what the music was playing. Like, it's really strange. And in Orthodoxy, they have, icons, which are paintings you'll find throughout the churches. And to paint an icon is a certain particular skill or qualification. I don't know what the vetting process is, but like not anyone can just do it. And what I've heard from the process is that these artists will go into a same sort of channeling state when they paint the icons channeled from God. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful message you got there of, it's like, where do you want to hitch your wagon up to? And, you can hitch it up to light or dark. So, choose your path.
Absolutely, man. I am 100% with you on that. And I think that people need to hear more hope. And yeah, you and I do talk about a lot of dark topics, but it's important for people to hear that. And I think it also doesn't need to be there to scare you. It's just there to make you aware of things going on in the world. And it just helps you learn, like you said, who you need to hitch your wagon up to. Maybe you hitch your wagon up to something that's going to make you want to help your brother and not knock your brother down, So I really appreciate you coming on, man. I had a blast today. I know we've been talking back and forth about doing something together soon. I'm glad this worked out. Can't wait for the new film to come out next year. I'm really excited about it, and we'll definitely link up around that time to get ready for that film for sure. I want to read a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche on the way out for people that don't think
of all
philosophers, because it ties into this episode. He said, "Do you believe then that the sciences would have arisen and grown if the sorcerers, alchemists, astrologers, and witches had not been their front runners?" So they were the ones that cooked it up from the beginning. So just know a lot of your sciences, and probably even your smartphone you're looking at right now, is a scrying portal that you're playing with. So
that's incredible. That's a good quote. All right.
Yeah, man. If you can't, tell everybody where to find you too on the way out.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I love hanging out with you guys. You guys have got good energy. So you can find me. I've got a podcast called Occult Symbolism and Pop Culture. If I would recommend you subscribe to it on whatever podcast app, because maybe you get on there and you see a couple episodes, you'll be like, this is stupid. Like, I've got one on the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul theory that I cooked up about it being tied to the end of the world. And some stuff is like a little sillier, some stuff's a little more serious. I've got a wide variety of subjects, so just subscribe to the show, and I guarantee you're going to see a few that come across that you're going to be like, I want to check this out. Like I said, I've got a massive Twin Peaks breakdown that's only for my Patreon supporters right now. You can if you like the podcast, I'll have links everywhere. Don't worry, I'll be grifting everyone towards the Patreon. But yeah, that's my podcast, and I've got a ton of stuff. Social media, I'm on Instagram at Isaac Weishaupt. If you want to find my books, my audio books, all that stuff, links to the podcast that I do, go to allmylinks.com/IsaacW. That's 2 A's, ISAAC. So allmylinks.com/IsaacW, and you can find jump offs to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and for anybody that's looking for any of my stuff, you can check out one of Merkel Media's newest podcasts, Free the Rabbits podcast. You can find it on any platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you want to go to. You can go to YouTube and type in /Free the Rabbits. I have video that goes up every Friday per episode. And if you're looking to find any of my music, films, or podcasts, you could just go to Linktree /Joel Thomas Media, and literally everything's there in one place. And that'll just get you to all the socials or whatever else, guys. And I know you've probably seen me a million times here on the Confessionals, and you'll probably see me a lot more, and hopefully we'll see Isaac here a lot more too. That'll be a lot of fun coming up in the future. But I'm going to end this a little different than Tony does. I'm going to end it like I do it on my show. You know how it is, guys. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow.